Welcome back to Words of Ex-Mormon today. It is second Saturday, which all of you know means it is Sunday. And on Sundays, I get to share with you a little portion of my Mormon story. Last week, I talked a little bit more about my youth, more about my teenage time frame in the church, going to seminary, that kind of thing. Today, I am going to talk a little bit about my college career and after. Covers a couple of years. And it is going to be a little bit longer. I may decide halfway through that I'm going to split it up, but for now, I feel like this blends together, and I try really hard to kind of create this content in a way that it's all pertinent, and then break it like not a cliffhanger, but at like a place where there's a natural break. And I feel like this all kind of works together. But we'll kind of see how it goes. Today I'm starting from college. I graduated in the year 2000. And I went to college at Weber State. It was not a choice that I made for educational purposes. I didn't even apply to anything else. I just, not even BYU. I don't know why. I didn't want to go to BYU. I didn't think that I could make it at BYU. I don't know if first of all, I just had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I had no, I'm very artistic. I write, I paint, I sing, there were a lot of things that I loved to do that way. But, when I was a senior in high school, and they only ever told millennials, college. College was the only choice. There wasn't really the option to do anything else. They basically told us, trade schools are for, cosmetology included, things that are skills but not college. Those things were for dumb kids who didn't do well in school, and military was for bad kids, and kids who wouldn't get accepted to colleges because their records or whatever. In order to make money and be successful, I had to go to college, and none of the things that I did naturally, that I was naturally drawn to, were things that were respectable or, could be done to make any kind of a living. So, I guess if I could have done anything at all, if I'd felt like there were options for me, or that I'd be supported in the pursuit of those, it would have been like an actress. I did a lot of theater in high school. I still do theater. Maybe an artist of some sort. I was very interested in Celtic folklore. I was an Irish dancer. In fact, I did all the kinds of dancing, all of the different kinds of dancing. And if I thought it was a realistic kind of living, I'd probably loved to have traveled around Europe, collected fairy stories, write those in books. Throughout high school, I was very praised for my writing abilities, and I was on the literary magazine at school. I wrote poetry, I wrote stories. But I had a real fear of that kind of travel like that. Even if I got offered, I even got offered a position, like a Disney princess position, at a job fair when I was in college. And they were height, weight requirements, my nose. There was a thing about my nose. It had to be a certain shape and look a certain way. But I was offered an audition, and I auditioned, and I got offered a job as a princess, not a specific one, just to go there, and for Disneyland, and I turned it down because I didn't know anybody in California. I would have had to go by myself. We didn't have really GPS at the time. I was really, really terrified. So that was crazy. But I've always been super creative, and to know that a cottage industry was a real thing would have been really interesting to me. But maybe if I had an idea I was allowed to, what else was allowed to be done as a career, maybe I would have pursued business, or something like that, so that I could have my own business and I could run a shop or something like that. But I didn't know those things were available. You know, the things that I was interested in were implied to be just not respectable. You can't make a living. But college was just really super pushed anyway, so I just went to college. My school counselor, my high school counselor, who helped me decide all these things, she was actually in our stake. She knew my family, and she really pushed for like my love of literature, because I did, like I said, I was on the literary magazine. I wrote all the time. I was in AP English classes. In fact, when I graduated, I did not need any more English credits for college for my associates. And so because I just had that many credits, and I got full score on, I think it was a 4. I don't remember how they score AP tests, and I think it's different for my kids now, but I had like nearly perfect scores on my English AP tests. Not the same for other AP tests I took, but my English was really my discussion of literature, my essays about literature were very in depth, and I got really good scores. But you know, she really pushed that and said that, you know, I had gifts that were from Heavenly Father, and that they would help me be a really good teacher, and that I could teach high school. Not only is that a good job for women, but also for a person who wants to be a mom. And that time I felt super validated. Like she was giving the best of both worlds, you know, like I could be a mom, and I could do something that I loved. Which I'm sure she also thought. I'm sure her intentions were great. I'm sure that she was not like intentionally being like, how can I like influence this girl's life so that she may regret it later, you know, or anything like that. But you know, looking at it, like, I just wish that I was given more insight into what was available, and allowed to like make my own choices about what I was interested in and what I liked doing, versus being like kind of coached into what was appropriate for me. But I applied to Weber State because it was an hour away from home. And I felt that given my whole life was kind of like in this like 15-minute radius bubble, like I just stayed in that area, and it felt like an hour was like super far away. And a girl in my neighborhood had gone there, and she was really happy there. And, so I remember thinking like, yeah, college, like I should apply to one, and I just applied to that one. I actually changed my major 5 or 6 times over the 3 years that I was there. I was there for 3 years. I was continually in school. I had one history class that I needed to retake again because my work schedule like overlapped it, and then I just didn't do well on the test because I wasn't there for the class, and that was complicated. But I did well. Even in math, which I did not do well in high school. Math was not my strong point, but I even did well in math. And I changed my major so many times, and so then I took a lot of like classes that weren't applicable to my associates, and I was really close by the time that I quit school, but I didn't get an associate's just because I was so aimless, you know. Anyway, so I changed it like 5 or 6 times over 3 years. I just didn't have any clue of what I wanted to do, and I was not passionate about any of the things that I had to sit in a classroom and learn. And I wanted to get married. I wanted a lot of kids. So just nothing held my interest for long. There weren't a lot of things about me that I knew were me at that time during my time in the church, but that is something that I can say with confidence, is that I did want to, 1, fall in love and be married, and 2, I wanted to have a lot of kids. And this, of course, is something that's pushed by the church, of course, but like it would have been true for me no matter what religion I was in or without the religion. I do think for the kids, at least, I always wanted a lot of kids. I adore my kids. If you know me, like, I am very close to all my kids. I think they are the best people. They're amazing, and I love them so much. And that is definitely something that was me. As far as the whole falling in love thing, like, it's not that I'd also adore my husband now too. I just want to say this, like, I feel like that whole portion, like, the whole idea that I needed to, like, it was like a rush, it was like a hurried thing. I needed to find somebody that I could fall in love with. Because if you remember, if you've watched my previous Mormon story stuff, I felt so mediocre, and I felt so unspecial and so insignificant in all ways. I felt like I wasn't the prettiest. I felt like I was not the smartest. I felt, and it's all internal, and it's all stupid, because like I'm happy with myself now. I am a very smart, very intelligent person. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder or whatever, and I still struggle with that self-image. But at the same time, like looking back at my sweet little baby self, like I didn't deserve to have to feel that way. And the church definitely played into that. Well, you're special, you're special, you're special. But then at the same time, the implication that there wasn't anything special about me, that I couldn't, I was supposed to be so special that I was Heavenly Father's chosen, but he wouldn't talk to me. He wouldn't give me those feelings or help me build my testimony, give me miracles. He wouldn't give me those things. And then also, like, my patriarchal blessing was super disappointing when I was 13, because it was just like a page long and it had nothing in it that was anything special to me. So all of those things, like, just, I felt like maybe if I could find a husband, because your husband is supposed to be this person that protects you and cherishes you, and, you're supposed to be his one and only, and you're supposed to be so special to him. And so I think that played into it. Not that without that weird, thought process behind it, that I wouldn't want to find somebody, or wouldn't care if I found somebody. Like, I would still want to be loved, and I'd want to find somebody. I just think that my outlook and my expectation of relationships would have probably been a lot healthier had I understood all this to begin with. But yeah, but my kids, like, I've always wanted a lot of kids, and I always would have, I'm sure. They're the best thing. I did take one institute class, just one. I did graduate from seminary, so I took all of the seminary classes going through high school, but I took one institute class, and my student aid wouldn't cover it out of pocket or cover it for some reason, so I paid for it out of pocket, and it was very expensive for me, because I was, I had to pay, my dorm, for my dorm, I had to pay for my food card, kind of a thing. I had to pay, like, I had expenses, and so it was difficult. But I took a temple prep class. The reason was that it was kind of the one, and I was a little bit late. I didn't register for institute. I was the first person, like, neither of my parents went to college. So I was kind of the first person who went to college. Nobody knew anything about going to college. We didn't know anything about applying for student aid, which I did. But I applied for that late. So anyway, that's a whole nother story. That's not even applicable. It's another thing. But we just didn't know what we were doing, is what I'm saying. So I registered for school classes, but I didn't know that institute was like this thing that you had to go and do separately. In high school, you just did it with your classes at school, because we had release time. It was a class at school. And so I just didn't know what I was doing. And when I went to the institute the day I moved to college, which was literally like the Saturday before school started on Monday, I was there, and so all the classes were full, or like they weren't ones that coordinated with my schedule. So I ended up taking a temple prep class. I was nowhere near ready to go to the temple. I wasn't planning on getting married or anything like that. It was the one that worked out with my schedule and what was available. And so I took that class, and it was ridiculous, because it was completely full of engaged couples who were preparing to get married. And so most of the guys had already been through the temple. They were there with their fiancés who were prepping for the temple, because they would be getting their endowments right before they got married. And so, I was kind of the odd one out for that reason. Also, I was this punky little thing with, like, I think it was black at the time. Like, it was a short bob, and it was black, and I had blue tips. and really, colorful hair, and I wore studded belts and band shirts and everything, kind of grungy. I know, I look like this now, but I was 21 months. I was 17, just barely turned 18 when, like, within days of moving to college. So, because my birthday is July 31st, I'm at the end of July. So just barely turned 18 when I moved to college. I was so fresh, so brand new, and I was a baby. And that's what I did back then. I was this little punky thing. And, I didn't fit into the typical Mormon girl look. I was legitimately completely ignored by the class, the teacher, the other students. No one ever talked to me, not once. No one said hi to me. The teacher didn't call on me when I raised my hand. Literally nothing. It was the most isolating class I'd ever had. So I took one class. I never went back. Once I was at college, it didn't take long for me to become inactive in the church. First of all, the singles ward there, which took place at the seminary building, it started at 7 a.m. It started at 7 a.m., meaning that I would have had to been up and ready and everything by at the very least 6:30, okay? Like, I'm a college student. I go to school early in the morning. I work all night. I have time for homework and friends. And that's barely between my work schedule and I was a waitress. And at Galaxy Diner, I wore a poodle skirt, and we did these hand jive dances and everything. It was super fun job. Didn't pay well, but it was fun. Like, I'm not going to get my butt up for church, something that I don't even enjoy that early on in the day. And I don't have, if I don't have a class or work or something that I have to be at that time, I'm not going to be up at it for something that's voluntary. I kind of built a little life there at school, and it was good. It took me a little while. I did have some homesickness. It took me about 6 weeks to adjust. But after that, I settled in. I made friends. I felt a lot of freedom. Freedom that, like, I've never had before, and the space to make choices for myself. I had a roommate for the first term, and then she moved out with her boyfriend, and we didn't really connect. We went to dinner once or something like that, but she was always, like, locking me out of our room, like, with the sock on the door, meaning making it, she would, like, make out with her boyfriend while I was in our room, like, so heavily that it was, like, super awkward until I would leave and go somewhere else. I did experiment a little. I met this guy in philosophy class my first semester. He lived in the same dorm complex, and I had my own dorm room the second semester and everything, and then later I had my own apartment with roommates and stuff. I basically lived with him though. That's all later. From the beginning we were in the same dorm, and we didn't live together at that point, but like right away or anything like that. But I did try alcohol, which I didn't like. I still don't like alcohol. I tried coffee, which I also didn't like. No drugs or smoking or anything though, so nothing too wild or out of the norm for the average college student. But having been raised in a very strict Mormon household, like, that seemed like a lot. I was pretty happy during all of that time. I didn't tell my parents about my inactivity, so they didn't know. After the original first semester, I didn't go home as often. I stayed at school. I used my job as an excuse. I'm still not sure, even now, that they are aware that I was sleeping with my boyfriend and not attending church. My boyfriend came from an almost entirely non-religious home. His mom had been raised Mormon and his dad had been raised Catholic, but they didn't really go to church at all. My boyfriend was super against the Mormon church because all of his friends were leaving on missions. He couldn't wrap his brain around that, really. They were putting their lives on hold for that, and he felt like it was a waste. At the time, the boys didn't go to college until about 19, and girls didn't go to or I'm sorry, they didn't go on missions until about the age of 19, and girls didn't go on missions until they were 21, and pretty much only if you weren't married at that time. So he was a really good guy. The guy that I dated, my boyfriend, he was very kind. He was really funny and very honest. He treated me with a lot of respect, and you know, like, I'm sorry, he was very handsome. But all of my friends were also on missions. So I had this really close group in high school, and I wrote to a plethora of missionaries. My uncle, I mentioned him previously too. He's 3 years older than me. And he was on his mission at the same time that I was in college. And so, kind of overlapped with my friends who were in college. And so anytime he'd have a missionary companion or somebody in his mission who didn't get a lot of letters from home or something, he would send them to me, basically, and I would write to these missionaries. So I was writing to tons and tons of missionaries. You know, like, I had dated one of the missionaries a little bit when I was in high school. He was in my close group of friends. My mom really, really liked him. She didn't like most boys I brought home to meet her, and she was pretty vocal about it. I would bring my boyfriend home from college, and she would kind of like actively bring up this boy that I had dated that she liked, and it was kind of infuriating and embarrassing, especially because, like, I didn't really have romantic feelings for the boy that was on the mission. And then my mom really wanted us together, but I just was really miserable the whole time that I was dating him. He was like my best friend. Like, I really loved him as a friend, but like I just couldn't get past that. Like, there wasn't anything romantic. And yeah, it just kind of infuriating that she couldn't get on board with me being happy and in a relationship with a good guy just because he wasn't Mormon, you know. And I was at school during the Olympics, and because they had the curling event there in Ogden, I actually had to leave my dorm during the Olympics and make space available for Olympians and out-of-town attendees. And so at that time, I tried to convince my parents, because at that time this was like the second year of college for me, and I was in the dorm, but I was pretty much living with my boyfriend. So I tried to convince my parents that I wanted to live with him. He was renting a house at that time with 3 or 4 other guys at the time. And I had been living on my own at that time, by the way, financially and physically, for 2 years. Olympics were in 2002. I started college in 2000. So I should have had full autonomy at this point. I should have just been able to do what I wanted to do. But there were some other dorms. My dorm was like a 1-room in a hallway where there was 1 bathroom for the whole floor, and everybody would share that bathroom. There was like at the end of the hallway, there was like a commons that people could hang out in, and then downstairs in like the main entryway, there was like this huge commons where everybody played games in or whatever. There was also a game room, a TV room, like pool room and stuff in the basement where the laundry was and stuff like that. But there were no kitchens in my dorm. We had like a food card, so like we would eat in the cafeteria, or there were places on campus, like restaurants that could take the card and stuff like that. So that's how I got food, but I didn't cook. It was cheaper than having one of the dorms that has the kitchen. But they kicked us out for the duration of the Olympics so that they could house the Olympians and stuff like that. And most people just went home. But and they just took a break until school resumed in a month. It was I think like it was just through February, I think. I don't remember the exact dates, of course. But we just left school. School stopped for a month, and then we came back at the end of it. But the other dorm that I was moving to, because they had separate dorms on the campus, and the one that I was going to be moving to was like, it had 4 rooms, and each room had 2 people in it, and then they shared a kitchen and living room. It was like an apartment, like more independent. They cooked their own food and stuff like that. And so that's where I could go if I wasn't going to go home. And I really couldn't go home because I had a job, and I just couldn't. I didn't want to go home. And I didn't want to quit my job. I also didn't want to like put it on hold or anything like that. I wanted to work through that month. But I tried to convince my parents that I should live with my boyfriend because, you know, let's see, I'm trying to stay on task here and I keep going off script. So, anyway, it was really, it was out of pocket though. Like my student aid paid for my dorm, but not during this month period where we were kicked out. So I had to pay out of pocket, and it was quite expensive. I don't remember how much it was, but it didn't make sense. Like it was super expensive. And my boyfriend and his roommates were like, just stay with us and we'll charge you this much, you know? And it was like really cheap. It was like a third of the amount that it was going to cost me to stay in the dorm. And they had their own laundry hookups there, and I already ate dinner with them all the time. I cooked. I cleaned their apartment and I did their laundry. And so they were always like fine with me being there because I always was taking care of them. So, which was fine. Like I did my own thing, and that's how I would have taken care of the place that I lived. And I just was never at home. I was never in my dorm. So I took care of the place that I lived in. And if I was doing laundry, I would throw whatever in with mine, and then it would be folded for them. And they were very grateful. They were very good guys. They didn't treat me like I was like owing it to them or anything. They just were like, you're not an issue. Like the other guys had girlfriends who were like slobs and stuff like that, and they didn't like them to be around because then they had to clean up after them, and they didn't have to clean up after me. And I took care of them, and they were very kind and protective and good to me that way. So they were like, we'll just give you like a super, super cheap deal if you want to just stay here, like super cheap. So anyway, but my parents insisted on paying for this dorm for the month and said that they don't want me to live with my boyfriend. So I did, you know, try to stay there at the dorm out of respect for my parents because they were paying for it. But my roommate there, and her roommate had gone home for the month that school was out, so I was taking her roommate's place, and she had to have the TV on in order to sleep. So like not just the light, but like also the sound. So I couldn't sleep at night with her TV on, and she couldn't sleep without it on. So I just ended up staying at my boyfriend's anyway. There's a lot to tell here. There isn't a lot to tell here from this point on. There's a lot coming. But as far as school goes, I went to school, I worked, I went to a lot of concerts. I had a really good time. I was a very normal college kid, probably a little scared, a little conservative because everything felt really big and new and unknown. 5 semesters in, which is about 2.5 years into my college experience, and that first serious relationship, all of my friends started to come home from their missions, pair off, and get married. So the boys came home, they married the girls, all of the same group members. Remember, I had a really close group of friends, and they, you know, I started taking my boyfriend with me to the weddings. And now I'd have to go to the temple and I'd have to wait outside. I wasn't active then, and I wasn't worthy to go in anyway. I could not have gotten a temple recommend anyway. But, you know, and I was a woman, so, you know, it wouldn't have mattered anyway. Even if I was active and worthy, I didn't have my endowments or anything, so I wouldn't have been able to go into the temple. And so I didn't feel like any kind of sting about that at that time, but I did feel like I was jealous of my friends who were going into the temple and coming out sealed forever. I thought that was like the most romantic notion. I wanted to be in love with somebody forever. I thought it was the, you know, like I mentioned, like I always wanted a lot of kids, and I wanted somebody to love me forever. I wanted somebody to want to be with me forever. But my boyfriend and I had also spent time with my maternal grandparents and, my aunts and uncles in Arizona for Christmas, or not Christmas, Thanksgiving time. So we had gone there, and at the time, he wanted to move to Alaska for school, and he wanted me to go with him. And I was ready to do that because I thought he was the one and all the things. But, there were a lot of kids at my grandparents when I was visiting them. All my uncles remember, I didn't have all these babies and stuff. They were my cousins, and I was a grown up. I didn't have cousins on that side growing up. I was very close in age to my uncles. My mom was not the oldest, but she was the second born of 6 kids, and her youngest brother, who is 3 years older than me, was born when she turned 19. So on her birthday. So I kind of grew up with my uncles, and I was also the oldest grandkid. So I didn't have cousins on that side until I was until I was a grown up. But we went there for Thanksgiving, and there were all these kids, and my aunt and uncle, they were married in the temple and everything. And they were just like, I just was feeling very maternal and starting to want those things and a commitment to relationship, not just to live together. And we'd been together for 2.5 years, and, I wanted a man to want me forever. And so I just didn't want to move forward and have a family without ensuring that I could be with them forever. Remember, I was inactive in the church, but it wasn't because necessarily I didn't believe. I don't necessarily think I did believe. It's what I was taught, and I'd never had freedom or never had gone without some kind of watchful eye making sure that I was doing everything I was supposed to do. And so I was making choices and things for myself that just didn't include the church or the teachings as part of the decision, so I hadn't researched anything. I didn't feel like, ooh, I have a burning testimony, but I also didn't feel like it wasn't true. Do you know what I mean? So I broke up with my boyfriend. And the church wasn't the only reason. It wasn't even the main reason, really. We didn't have the same life goals. He wanted 2 kids, max. I wanted a bunch, obviously. He wanted me to have a career. I didn't have anything I wanted to do. I just wanted to raise my babies. And I wasn't necessarily opposed to having a job. I just, he really wanted me to be ambitious and pursue a career and have something that was my passion and my profession and my expertise. And I was just not that kind of ambitious. He was at the time planning to go to Alaska, like I mentioned, and I just didn't want to go live there permanently. But yeah, I broke up with him, and it was really, really hard because I really did love him, and I struggled so badly with it, and he did as well. But it would have been a really difficult long-term relationship, it would have been both of us would have had to give up things that were important to us, and it just wouldn't have been fair. And we were both exceptionally stubborn on the specific things that we disagreed on, so it wouldn't have been a compromise as much as it would have been a fight all the time. And it was really hard. One of us would have to have ended up not being able to receive out of life the thing that we wanted, we wouldn't have been fulfilled long term. I look back at that and I always say that it was kind of a juvenile love, but I did love him very much, and it broke my heart. Just devastated my heart. He told me that I was selfish. There it is again. When I broke up with him, back to the selfishness that I was so internalized with. And I thought, yeah, maybe it is a selfish thing. Maybe I'm a selfish person, but maybe it was, also the best decision. Those were things we both needed to be selfish about, and because they would affect our lives, and we wanted different lives. So I embraced that selfishness at that time. It didn't last very long. Obviously, I went back to being gaslit about my selfishness, but it never crossed my mind that he was being selfish for demanding that, I change what I want in my life so that I could accommodate him and that he wasn't willing to accommodate me either. That never crossed my mind. I was the selfish one. I was being selfish about what I wanted, and it was, it was just what was important to me, and I wasn't willing to budge on those things. So I decided that I was okay with that, and maybe that one day he would be glad that I was selfish so that he could have the things that he wanted later. I did have to meet with my bishop to repent and all that. I hadn't attended church in about 2.5 to 3 years at that time. So I went to the singles ward for the first time with my jar of tithing that I'd saved all that time, because I always paid tithing even when I wasn't active. And I made an appointment with my bishop. And I have to say, I've had a few significant interactions with my bishop as a youth, and a third one that kind of I didn't let be significant. I kind of ran away from it. I'm going to talk about it. But I had two that were very, very good interactions. And it was so, so lucky for me that the bishopric roulette worked out in my favor. It could have been so much worse for me. My first experience was when I was 13, and we're going to go back in time here a little bit. Like I said, I try to do this in chronological order. Sometimes the chronological order doesn't work as well when you're telling a story and it's applicable to something else. So it happened when I was 13, but when I was 12, I went into Young Women's, and I got my very first little Strength of the Youth pamphlet. And I always wanted to be a really good kid, at least on the outside. I was a really good kid. I wanted to be good. I wanted to obey God. I wanted to have spiritual experiences. And so I studied it in detail. And I read the sexual purity section about how you shouldn't masturbate. And if you do need to get forgiveness through confession to the bishop, that's how you need to do it. You have to talk to the bishop. You have to confess. And I didn't even know what that meant at 12 years old. I had done it. Like, I can't wrap my head around the people who say that they never masturbated. Who doesn't do that? Like, I just feel like it's like, I just didn't know it was against the rules. I didn't know it had a name. I didn't know what it was. So I think it's a really pretty normal, healthy experience for child development. And, and as a little child, like, it wasn't a sexual thing for me to begin with. And, of course, as time went on, by the time I got into Young Women's, like, it was super, like, age appropriate. Like, I would imagine kissing a boy, and that was enough. Like, I knew what sex was. I was appropriately educated on that, but like, I was so confused about what masturbation was. I was like, I got to figure this out because I have to make sure that I never do this thing, I figured it out with a dictionary because I knew it was sexual in nature. So I didn't want to ask my parents. And, I knew that they would probably not be happy about me asking about it. And we didn't have the internet. I mean, we could email, I think by that point, maybe, I don't know. We had the Oregon Trail when I was 12. I don't remember the time when I started actually emailing or being on the internet. I don't know. I was probably a later teenager, but we didn't have Google. So it wasn't like I could look that up somewhere. And I was really appalled because I'd been doing this thing my whole life and I had no idea that it was bad or that I wasn't supposed to do it. So it took me until I was 13. It took me an entire year. I was so horribly embarrassed by it that I thought, I don't need to tell anybody about this. I just need to stop doing it, and I'll just pray, and I don't need to involve a grown-up man who, could tell my parents. I would have just been mortified, and I knew my parents would be very severe about that. So I was so scared that I just tried over and over again to just not do it, and then I just couldn't make it that long. And so I finally sucked it up, and I went to see my bishop. I was like shaking visibly and I was just so embarrassed. And then, but I kind of thought, I couldn't quit by myself. Like, maybe if I repented properly and I told my bishop and I did the confession like it said I was supposed to in my little booklet and everything, then maybe it would stick, like maybe the reason I couldn't figure out how to resolve this on my own was because I hadn't been honest about it. and I hadn't repented properly. Well, I went in and I sat in this chair and I cried for probably a half an hour. My poor bishop just looked at me. He probably thought something much, much worse was happening. And, you know, and I have to hand it to him. Okay. This bishop was the coolest. He was at least part Native American. I don't know. I never asked him or anything like that. What I do know is that he had stuff that people who aren't Native American aren't allowed to have, like a full leather mountain man getup. If you're a mountain man, you know, these days, like, you can't have eagle feathers, like, that's illegal. He had eagle feathers. He had, the mountain man getup has to be made out of a different material, like linen or something like that. You can't have like a full leather. There's like certain regulations. I was in some clubs, like cultural clubs in high school, and I learned those kinds of things. There are certain things you're not allowed to have if you aren't Native American in some capacity or another. Anyway, so like based on those things and what he had to have been at least partial Native American. And he had this full leather outfit with like fringe on the arms and stuff, and these beaded moccasins that he would wear. And he did like leather working, and he had eagle feathers on these like necklaces, and he did this intricate beadwork that he'd make into bookmarks for us girls, like leather bookmarks and things, at girls' camp. And then he made these tiny little dream catchers that he would put on these necklaces, and he'd give them to us. He did. He used tobacco from a cigarette, which was like, whoa, like God put things here on the earth for us to use, really. Like, we're not supposed to smoke it. We're supposed to use it to like heal, you know. And he healed this bruise on this girl who had fallen into the river on some rocks. And like, he told us really cool native lore around the campfire at girls' camp and stuff like that. And there was like this dead squirrel that he was like, you know, helped us bury and give that back to the earth and stuff. Like, I don't know. He just was so cool. And I super appreciated him. He did have like this, his hair was white and it was very thick, and it was like, he'd kind of like, it was like parted on the side, and like, but it was short, but not like missionary haircut, not like white guy short, you know what I mean? And he looked Native American, but like Mormon Native American. And I think at that time, the Mormon geography mythology that the Lamanites were from like South America, like the Mayans or the Aztecs or something. And that's the impression that I had been under, like in seminary and stuff. I wasn't in seminary yet. I was 12 to like 16 maybe. Anyway, when he was first my bishop, I wasn't in seminary anyway, but I was under the impression they were kind of like in the South American area. So it never really occurred to me to consider him a Lamanite. So that was not something that I was aware of, but he was older, but I just adored him. And so that whole thing made this a lot harder. I got my confession out through sobs, and this poor bishop just looked at me for a minute and said, well, that's pretty normal part of childhood. I think that everyone does that sometimes. Just don't look at pornography. Try to keep your mind clean. You don't need to come back for this again. And he shook my hand and I left. And I honestly loved him so much more for it. I think to a degree, he had some respect for me too, because he did not tell my parents. He did not shun me. He did not bring it up again in any capacity when I came to church and callings. I was in the Young Women Presidency callings or activities. Like, he never looked at me or talked to me in a way that made me feel stupid, or like my confession had a lasting impression or a negative one. He didn't ask about it in future Temple Recommend interviews. And then when he was an advocate, for me many times over the next couple of years, you know, with my parents and things, like I wanted to get my patriarchal blessing, and my parents kind of thought I was too young, but he was like, she can get a blessing if she wants to. And I appreciated that. Nothing that was ever creepy or inappropriate or anything like that. You know, he just made me feel really worthy and really normal, and like it just wasn't a big deal. Well, luckily the bishop I had in my singles ward was just as awesome. And I hadn't even really attended church at all. So this guy didn't even know me. I showed up. sorry. I showed up out of nowhere with my jar of tithing that I'd collected for 3 years and confessed and paid my tithing all in the same day. And I don't remember his name, but I remember that he was not elderly. He was probably my parents' age, which would have been like late 40s, maybe, like older than I am now, but not like grandparent age quite yet, I guess. I guess I kind of thought he was maybe a little bit old then, but I'm 42 now and I just don't feel like that's that old. But he was really down to earth, like weathered cowboy kind of guy. He was wearing, when I met him, a plaid shirt with a bolo tie and a cowboy hat at church. So I told him that I had been inactive and that I wanted to come back to church and that I needed to confess my sins, and because I'd been living with and sleeping with my boyfriend, and I cried. Honestly, I wasn't really sorry, and I didn't feel that guilty. It was just, the steps that I had to take to be able to go where I wanted to go. And I didn't have like regrets, really. I didn't feel dirty. I didn't feel bad. I was embarrassed because like sex was like a really personal thing to me, and it seemed kind of gross to talk about with anyone else, let alone like this guy who didn't know me. But he was very kind. And I had said that I just kind of looked around the sacrament meeting at all these people who were like shining and perfect examples of, what a Mormon should be. And I felt stupid and like I was an imposter. And he leaned over his desk and he said, "Don't feel that way. Most of them have confessed about the same things you're confessing." He didn't name names or anything like that, but he made me feel just super duper normal. And he didn't make me give details about anything. I had to go 6 weeks without the sacrament, and he had me read the Miracle of Forgiveness, but only specific chapters. He told me the rest of the book was absolute filth and not to read it, only to read these chapters. And I don't remember what the chapters were. I ignored him though, because I wanted to be like overly successful, and to a degree I was curious, like Belle in Beauty and the Beast, where she's like, "I just want to know what's in the West Wing." So I read the whole thing. And of course, it was very troubling. Now, on to my third, which was really my second interaction with a bishop. And this is a trigger warning. Trigger warning here for everybody who may want to skip ahead. This includes SA. Nothing detailed, just so you know. But it does. I had a situation where I was assaulted at prom under my big poofy dress. We were in the middle of all of our friends in a limo. And I don't have a fight or flight reflex. I freeze. It wasn't forceful. It didn't look scary. It looked very normal, I think. I just like two teenagers making out maybe. And my fluffy dress hid what else was going on down under. I had my hand on the door, literally ready to just fall out onto the highway. But I couldn't move. Brandon, who is my ex-husband, and he is coming up here in a moment, he was there in the limo with his date too. I think there were probably 10 of us in the limo, and he noticed what was happening, probably the stunned, terrified look on my face, and he interrupted the whole thing without drawing excessive attention to me, and it did not go very far. So it was very, very mild compared to some traumatizing things others have experienced. And being totally fair, my trauma was mild and did not cause extensive discourse for me. I absolutely do know, though, how I would react in a more dire situation. I didn't talk about that situation, not to my bishops or parents or anything, until shortly after I went away to college. So the timeline for me is fuzzy. I know I was in college. I know that my relationship status was single. So it was shortly after I went to college. There was an upcoming temple dedication. This would have been around the time of the year, fall 2000-ish. I guess maybe as late as 2001, but I don't think that would have lined up with said relationship statuses. I remember that it was supposed to be a significant temple dedication. I don't remember where it was. what temple it was, but I seem to think it was going to be broadcasted. So maybe because it was out of state or something, I don't know. Anyways, I wanted to go. So I had gone when I came home from college one day. I had gone to my parents' ward and their bishop to get a recommend. And when he got to the law of chastity, I remember he didn't ask me the question, which is typical, do you follow the law of chastity, or do you obey the law of chastity, or something, to which I would have just answered yes at that time. Instead, he asked me if I had ever allowed a boy to touch me in any of my private areas. And as sweet and innocent as I was, and I knew that this was not my fault and all that, so I told him about what happened at prom. And I told him exactly what had happened and how scared I was and how Brandon had saved me, saved me. And like legit, like it just sounds like such a damsel in distress, which it's not far off, really. I don't know why that made me giggle, but and that this was the only experience that I'd had. And this bishop told me I could not have a temple recommend, and I couldn't go to the dedication. He wanted me to come back from school every Sunday and visit with him each Sunday until he said, that I was finished with that. And I wasn't allowed to take sacrament. He didn't give me a time frame that I remember. I just said, be at this church, visit with me every Sunday, don't take the sacrament. I was disenchanted at that point. I was like not overly mad at this guy. I was just like a little embarrassed, but mainly I was just like over church and I didn't want to talk to him again. So if I came home for a weekend, I would go back to school Sunday morning and I would miss church, or I'd go home Saturday night or something like that. And so from then on, I just didn't go to church at all. I also got into a relationship with the same boy who SA'd me, which was super self-destructive choice. May have had something to do with that interaction with the bishop and the fact that I was being punished for something that I didn't do. I guess that could have been seen as an act of rebellion, but honestly, it was self-destruction. And it didn't take me anywhere good. And I pushed the chastity boundaries, not all the way, but quite far. And we didn't ever officially break up. He went on a mission, and I Dear John'd him a few months later. So now back to when I was reading The Miracle of Forgiveness in college. That book told me that if I didn't fight when I was being SA'd, then it was worse for me spiritually, and that I would be better if I had died. Well, I understood that specific bishop wanted me to go through some sort of repentance, the one when I told him about my essay. He wanted me to go through some sort of repentance process for what was done to me. I didn't feel like I needed to confess or get forgiveness because I didn't think there was anything wrong, that I did anything wrong. And I was just telling him because he asked specifically, and I was trying to be honest. And I hadn't thought in any way that I would be in trouble. But I also was not aware that the church on a large scale viewed SA as shameful or, for the victim. And I certainly didn't think that it would have been something that they'd counsel me to like lose my life over defending. And the boy who did it, I know he would be horrified if he realized what my thoughts were. I knew his intentions were very different. He assumed that I would have said no if I wasn't interested. We were very close friends. This is the boy my mom really wanted me to be with. It was when I was trying to attempt to be in a relationship with him too. And we were very close friends. We're very comfortable together with each other. He was my best friend. And I had kissed him earlier in the evening consensually. And he 100% was always respectful after that point. He never tried to knowingly force me into anything. And I'm not excusing at all the behavior or blaming myself. What he was doing was not okay. I'm just saying that boy is he's not a danger. He's not a monster or a predator in general. And I just am saying, like, consent needs to be taught in recognizing body language as much as it needs to be taught about hearing no when someone says no, because our bodies don't always obey our brains. And my body went into survival mode, and it was like, sit here very still until it passes and you might survive. I also have to say that I think dying is worse than just complying until it's over. My life is more precious than my virginity or my virtue. So I'm not of the opinion that having been assaulted or even having sex damages a person. I don't think that damages their virtue at all. So sorry, not sorry. I took my questions to my college bishop too, and he literally was like, damn it, Bray, I told you not to read that bullshit, right in the middle of the church building hallway. So like everybody was around and they hear him swear and say this and everything. I laughed out of relief. He did talk to me about the incident at that point and validated that it was not my fault. And he said he was sorry that I had to endure it. I did not mention to him that I had talked to the previous bishop about it. I think I may have already forgotten about that at that point, because this whole scenario is something that I recently kind of brought to the surface of my memory. I talked about the experience where I was at prom and had that the SA experience, but I talked about that before, but the interview with that bishop was so short and not extensive and everything that I didn't even think about it. My bishop in college did give me my temple recommend on the 6th week after my repentance. I quit school after 3 years, which was shortly after I went back to church. Honestly, I just was so aimless, and I didn't get that degree. I explained that already. I changed my major so many times. I just couldn't figure out what I wanted to do, and I was broke, and I was bored, and I moved back home, and I got married. And I have more to say. I was going to put it all together, but I think this is probably a halfway point, and I'm going to stop here. I'll make a new video with that, but I know this was kind of a hard one to get through, probably listening as well as it was for me to tell it, but I'd love to hear from you, so please feel free to comment, like and share. Thank you so much, and think terrestrial. I'll talk to you soon.